man became aware of an impatient woman who was tailgating him. She was so close that when he had a break to allow some children to use a crosswalk, she almost crashed into him. Furious at having to stop, the woman blasted the horn and began waving her fists and asserted finger in a disgraceful exhibition of road rage. Continuing her frenzy and oblivious to what was going on around her, she heard a tap on her window. It was a police officer who promptly ordered her to put the car in park and step out of it. She was then taken down to the police station where she was searched, fingerprinted, photographed, and put into a jail cell. A couple of hours later, after identification and vehicle checks had been carried out, the woman was told that she was being released without any charges. As she collected her things, she voiced her indignation, demanded an explanation and an apology from the officer. The arresting officer explained the reason for the mistake. "You see, ma'am," he said, "I pulled up behind your car while you were furiously blowing your horn and loudly cursing the driver in front of you. It was then that I noticed the chrome-plated Christian fish symbol on the trunk and the "Follow Jesus, not me" sticker on the rear window and the "God is love" sticker on the bumper. So naturally, I assumed you were driving a stolen car." Today's epistle, we are reminded that sometimes the way we act and the things we say don't always correspond to what we profess to be. St. James is telling his listeners, and here his target audience are the teachers or the rabbis, he's telling them to think twice about whether they are really called to the work of teaching. Of course, those who teach are held to a higher standard. If you can't control what you say, he says, if you can't bridle your tongue, you can do more harm than good to your impressionable listeners. In fact, he says, you can set fires. Now, of course, as followers of Jesus, we are all expected to be teachers as well, and to live our lives in such a way that we are easily recognizable as Christians, which, among other things, means that the only words that come off of our tongue and out of our mouth should be fruitful, godly words. Now, if you're like me, that's easier said than done. I'm the first to admit, and some of you know this firsthand, I am not always a paradigm of holiness when I am stuck in a traffic jam on the Merritt Parkway for no apparent reason. Or when someone out here, well, this was at St. Paul, someone over there on Route 123 is driving 25 miles over the speed limit and tailgating me. I'll admit, I've said some rather un-Jesus-like things. We all miss the mark from time to time, some of us more than others, but that's another sermon. St. James himself admits to falling short. He says all of us make many mistakes. He includes himself. But that doesn't mean that we don't keep asking for God's help and that we don't keep trying and trying and trying. I'm sure you've all had the experience of going for a medical checkup, and one of the first things the doctor does is make you stick out your tongue. I don't like it, but evidently there's a good reason for it. A doctor can often diagnose physical illness just by looking at a person's tongue. There's a spiritual correlation to that. We can get a pretty good indication of our own spiritual health by looking at what comes off of our tongue, by examining some of the things that we say to others or about others. This is exactly what Jesus is talking about in his debate with the rabbis. You might remember the story where Jesus takes them to task over the dietary laws. What could be eaten and what was unclean. Jesus says it's not what goes into you that makes you unclean or unholy. It's what comes out of you. It's the words that we say, the things that we do that make us unclean. Hateful words that sometimes slide all too easily off of our tongues. And harmful actions that occur before we realize it. Things that cause hurt. Or worse, as St. James reminds us, things that influence others to act the same way, or things that turn others away from Christ instead of drawing them to him. If we were to read the next few lines of this same epistle, and you'll hear it next week if you're here, St. James goes so far as to say that those who consider themselves holy and yet do not keep a tight rein on their tongues deceive themselves, and their religion is worthless. Strong words. Let's take a look at today's gospel. In today's gospel, it's St. Peter who once again loses control of his tongue. And I say once again because Peter is always the one who says something inappropriate or untimely throughout the Gospels. And this is one of those instances. When Jesus asks Peter, "Who do the people say that I am?" Peter responds, "Some say John the Baptist, some say Elijah, some say that you're one of the prophets." Good answer. When Jesus asks, "And who do you say that I am?" Again, Peter has the right answer. You are the Messiah. Well, poor Peter just can't get three in a row. If Peter was a ball player, well, maybe except for this season, he'd be playing for the Mets. And please don't tell Father Joe that I said that. Peter can't deal with Jesus talking about anything but fame and glory and victory. So he angrily pulls Jesus aside and starts giving him a tongue lashing. Didn't you just hear what I said? You're the Messiah. You're the one that's going to make everything right. Everyone's going to love you, and you're going to get us out of this mess, and there's going to be a big victory party. So stop all this crazy talk about rejection and suffering and being killed. I don't want to hear it. Peter does exactly what James is warning us about. In one breath, he professes that Jesus is the Christ, the anointed one, the Messiah, and in the next, he lashes out at everything it actually means to be the Christ. And Jesus calls Peter Satan, not because he's evil. He's really not evil. He's dense. Jesus realizes that Peter's understanding of who he is not fully integrated into his being. There's still a disconnect between what he says he believes and how that informs his responses. Peter's unbridled, untamed tongue takes over, and Jesus' concern is that Peter's words might lead others into misunderstanding. Peter wants the good things and the glory, but he doesn't want any part of the bad stuff and the rejection and the pain. Aren't we just like Peter in so many ways? And yet Jesus tells us very clearly, both in his words and in his actions, that in order to have one, you must have the other. If you want to be part of my glory, Jesus says, then take up my cross and walk with me to Calvary. Peter's response, as St. James calls it, is a fresh spring yielding brackish water. And one look at Peter's tongue and Jesus, the great physician, diagnoses spiritual immaturity and lack of integration. This weekend is bracketed by two important days. On Friday, we remembered the horrors of 9/11, the result of teachers teaching badly and influencing others to create chaos and havoc and destruction. And tomorrow, the church observes the great feast of the exaltation of the cross, a day that we celebrate the instrument of torture and pain that allowed Jesus to enter into chaos and death so that he could overcome it and come out on the other side victorious. That was done for each one of us. And the result is that we now share in Christ's resurrection. The simple truth of our faith is that we cannot have resurrection without first going through the darkness and the chaos and the uncertainty of death. That's as much a literal truth as it is a metaphorical truth. Jesus invites us to follow him, not merely to participate in the special days and the happy occasions, but to follow him every day and to be faithful to him in every situation, in the good and in the bad, and to never lose hope, and most of all, to never act in a way that would lead anyone astray. The woman in the car found out the hard way what it means to really be a follower of Jesus. Some of you might remember the hymn that says, "They will know we are Christians by our love." It doesn't say by the church we go to, or by the stickers we have on our car, or by the symbols we wear around our neck. No, others will know that we are followers of Christ by the way we integrate the teachings of Jesus into our lives so fully that only love flows from us. A love that influences everything we say and everything we do. Just as a stream of fresh water yields only fresh water, so the soul infused with Jesus pours out only love. There's a unique but kind of sad tombstone in a cemetery in Massachusetts that dates back to the 18th century. And it reads, "Beneath this stone lies Arabella Young. On May 4th, 1760, God finally held her tongue." Brothers and sisters, don't be like Arabella Young. Poor Arabella had to die for her tongue to be bridled. Imagine what fire she set and the hurt she imparted with some of the things she must have said if that's the way the townsfolk chose to memorialize her. Here's the good news. Today Jesus says, try to understand who I am and be more like me. Accept me, live in me, learn from me, and let your words and actions sow love and peace, not chaos and discord. In those times when we miss the mark, think of Peter. Peter was a good man. He got it right 2 times out of 3. But Peter needed the resurrection to convince him. That's when he finally got it. And when he did, he picked up his cross and he followed Jesus completely. And he allowed that new, mature relationship to inform his entire being. That's the point where Peter became the rock that Jesus built his church on. Today, Jesus invites each one of us into that same relationship. It took the resurrection for Peter to say yes. The question for each of us is, what will it take for you, for me, to do the same?